It was Mia's graduation day, and the weight of the morning felt heavier than I expected. Tim, my brother, had been excited about it for weeks, but I could already tell by the way he sounded on the phone that something was off. I just wanted to confirm the guest list, he said, his voice too smooth. We've kept it small, for the sake of Mia's day. Just close family. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, assuming it was just a formality. Then he hit me with it. So, we've decided Lily shouldn't come. I froze. I had to hear the words again, the ones that didn't make sense. What do you mean she shouldn't come? I asked, my voice low, trying to steady myself. Tim's tone shifted, a practiced, almost rehearsed calmness settling in. It's a formal event, We just think it's better if she doesn't come. We're keeping it tight, just to make things smooth. Smooth, that word. It wasn't about the event at all, not really. It was about control, about perfect appearances. And Lily, my bright, enthusiastic daughter, didn't fit their ideal. My throat tightened. I wanted to yell, to demand an explanation. But instead, I just felt a quiet shock, a disbelief that was already turning into anger. Lily, the child who had looked forward to this for weeks, who had practiced what to say, what to wear, who had prepared herself to be included, excluded. Just like that, I forced the words out. Noted, we won't be attending. I hung up before I could say anything else, the words already ringing in my ears. The idea that my daughter wasn't right for an event because she wasn't like everyone else felt like a slap. But I didn't want to make it worse for Lily. She was already so sensitive, always picking up on things, and I couldn't bear to see her hurt by this. So I kept it to myself, determined to protect her from that cruelty. Still, I knew something had changed. 3 weeks later, Tim's world began to unravel, though he had no idea it started with one decision to exclude my daughter from a family celebration. I could almost hear the cracks spreading in the foundation of his so-called smooth day, as everything that seemed so perfect started to fall apart. The morning after I spoke to Tim, I found Lily sitting at the kitchen table, her small hands clutching a pencil with a determined grip. She was bent over a stack of paper, scribbling furiously. It wasn't an art project, at least not in the way I'd expect from her usual creations. This was different. This was a plan. As I watched her work, it became clear that Lily had taken my absence from Mia's graduation and turned it into a project of her own. A mission. A goal she was determined to accomplish. On the counter beside her were several lists. They were neatly written in her careful handwriting, the letters blocky and precise. One list was titled Things to Say, and beneath it were short phrases like, congratulate Mia, say you're excited, and don't ask too many questions. Another list titled Things Not to Say included the words, I don't know, can I leave now, and I'm tired. And then there was the map of the seating arrangement at the graduation, with tiny, detailed drawings of people she hoped to avoid. The whole thing was meticulous, organized like a military operation. I stopped in the doorway and watched her work. She was so focused, her pencil tapping against the paper as she thought, her brow furrowed. She wasn't just preparing for the graduation. She was preparing to fit in, to be included, even though she had already been excluded without ever being told why. Mom, she asked without looking up, what do I do if they ask me how I feel about the speech? I smiled softly, trying to hide the lump forming in my throat. You say what's true, sweetie. If you don't know, you can just say that. That's okay. Lily frowned, clearly not satisfied with my answer. But I need to be prepared. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, realizing that for her, this wasn't just about attending a celebration. It was about survival. It was about finding a way to navigate a world that often didn't understand her. The phone rang, and I reached for it, hoping it wasn't Tim. I didn't want to hear his voice right now, but of course it was. Hey, quick question, Tim said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the strain in his voice. We finalized the guest list for Mia's big day, and I just wanted to check. Lily's not coming, right? I froze, my blood running cold. This wasn't just a question, it was an ultimatum. It was clear. Tim had made his decision, and it wasn't about Lily or Mia. It was about his desire to keep things perfect, to keep things smooth. And in his mind, Lily didn't fit that image. I managed to say, Tim, Lily's been looking forward to this for weeks. She's been practicing what to say. She wants to be a part of this. His response was predictable. It's just, She's a little much for the situation. I felt my patience snap. What do you mean? You're saying my daughter doesn't belong? I could hear his sigh on the other end of the line. Look, it's not about that. It's about keeping the focus on Mia. We don't want any distractions. A lump formed in my throat, and the anger I was trying to suppress rose to the surface. I had never been more disappointed in him. When I ended the call, I looked at Lily, who was still sitting at the table, her eyes focused on her lists. She hadn't heard much of the conversation, but I could see the way her posture had stiffened. She knew. She always knew. Without saying anything, she picked up her list and began folding it neatly, as though organizing her thoughts could make it hurt less. And then, as she put the paper away, she said the only thing that seemed to matter to her. Okay. And that was it. No bargaining, no pleading, no asking me why. She had already accepted what was happening. She was once again being left out of something that should have been hers. The days following my conversation with Tim felt like they were moving in slow motion, each hour stretching longer than the last. I kept busy with work, kept my mind occupied, but all I could think about was Lily. She never mentioned Mia's graduation again, but I knew it was there, hanging over us like a shadow. She'd accepted it, her absence from the event, but the quiet resignation in her eyes cut deeper than anything Tim or I had said. 3 weeks passed, and I tried not to dwell on what had happened, but it was impossible to ignore the shifts happening within Tim's world. First, it was the vendors. He called one day, his voice strained, telling me that a few of them had canceled last minute. They didn't give me a reason, but it's just bad timing, he said, though I could hear the edge in his voice. Then the photographers. They arrived late to the event, giving excuses that didn't seem to add up. I heard from a friend of mine that several of the guests who had RSVP'd pulled out at the last minute, some of them citing scheduling conflicts. None of it made sense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all somehow connected. Still, I held off. I stayed quiet. I wasn't ready to say anything to Tim to make it seem like I was taking pleasure in his misfortune. But a small part of me, one I wouldn't admit out loud, felt like this was the universe's way of giving him a taste of what he'd done. The discomfort, the chaos, the disconnection, it was all slowly creeping into his perfect world, just like his exclusion of Lily had disrupted ours. One night, as I was cleaning up after dinner, my phone buzzed. It was Tim. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not sure if I was ready to hear what he had to say. But I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him forever. I swiped to answer. "Hey, Aaron," Tim said, his voice different this time, softer, apologetic. "Can we talk?" I sighed, wiping my hands on the dish towel. "Sure. He paused, as if collecting his thoughts. "Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't mean to hurt Lily, or you." His words felt strange coming from him, like he was trying to fit into a role that didn't quite belong to him. I waited, not sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell him how wrong he was, how he had crossed a line. But the other part of me, the part that had spent years smoothing things over, making sure everyone else was happy, just listened. "I just didn't think it would turn into all this," he said, his voice tinged with guilt. "Can we fix this? Maybe come over for dinner, talk things out?" I felt the anger rise in my chest, but it was mixed with something else, something softer, something that longed for the family we once were. But I knew better now. This wasn't about fixing things for me or Lily. It wasn't about mending the cracks in his perfect world. It was about saving face, about making sure his celebration wasn't overshadowed by his own choices. "I'm not sure we can fix this, Tim," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Not this time." There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought the call had dropped. "I get it," Tim finally said, his voice quieter. "But just know, I didn't mean for it to go like this." I wasn't sure if I believed him, but it didn't matter. I didn't need an apology. I needed him to understand the weight of what he had done, to realize that it wasn't just about one event. It was about what it meant to be family. And I wasn't going to let him minimize that. "I'll think about it," I said before ending the call. I set the phone down and looked over at Lily, who had been sitting on the couch, drawing quietly. She hadn't overheard the conversation, but she didn't need to. She could tell by the way I was standing, by the way my shoulders had tensed. She always knew. Is everything okay? She asked, her voice soft but steady. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, sweetie, everything's fine. But it wasn't. It wasn't fine at all, and deep down I knew I had made the right decision. The days after my conversation with Tim were a blur of small decisions, things that were too insignificant on their own, but somehow piled up in a way that left me exhausted. I didn't need to think much about the consequences of excluding Lily from Mia's graduation anymore. I'd already made my choice, but it wasn't until a few weeks later that I saw the true fallout from Tim's actions. Things were unraveling in ways I hadn't anticipated, but they were undeniably linked to what had happened. It started small, a missed email from a potential client. Then, another one. I could tell Tim was trying to keep his frustrations under control when he called, but it wasn't hard to hear the crack in his voice. You wouldn't believe it, he said. Everything's falling apart. Vendors are canceling last minute, and some of the guests are pulling out too. It's like everyone's got other plans all of a sudden. I said nothing, though inside, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of vindication. It wasn't something I was proud of, but it was hard to ignore the connections forming. It wasn't just coincidence. Tim had been so focused on keeping up appearances, and now those same appearances were slipping through his fingers. His world, this perfect event, was crumbling in front of him, bit by bit. A few days after the phone call, I received another text from Tim. His tone was desperate now, not the smooth confidence I had become used to, but a genuine plea. Can we please talk? I didn't mean for things to get this bad. Can you and Lily come for dinner? I just want to make things right. I didn't immediately respond. I was sitting at the kitchen table, Lily drawing as usual, her crayons scattered across the counter. She hadn't asked much about the wedding or Mia since I told her we wouldn't be going, but I could tell it was still there in the way she avoided looking at her lists, the ones she had made so carefully. Tim wanted to fix things, but I wasn't sure I could. I didn't need to talk about my daughter's worth with him anymore. I had done that for years. I had begged for understanding, for patience. But now it seemed like he was only interested in fixing his image, not the harm he had done. Later that evening, I called him. The conversation was short, to the point. Tim, we won't be attending. I appreciate the invitation, but this isn't something that can just be fixed with dinner. There was silence on the other end. For a moment, I thought he had hung up. I understand, he said quietly, but I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted it to be perfect. I wanted to scream, to tell him that perfection wasn't the point, that the people you love, your family, are supposed to come first. But I didn't. I just said, I know, Tim, but sometimes the price of perfection is too high. The call ended with no resolution, just a quiet finality that hung between us. That night, as I sat with Lily at the dinner table, I couldn't help but think about the life we were now living. There was no drama, no chaos, just a peaceful, quiet rhythm. I watched Lily, who was humming to herself, and I realized that for the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to fix anything for anyone. Not for Tim, not for anyone else. I was just being, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The decision had been made, the lines had been drawn, and no matter how hard Tim tried to fix things, the damage had already been done. We were done. It had been 3 weeks since I made the decision, and I couldn't ignore the change in the air anymore. The ripple effects of Tim's actions had gone beyond his wedding day. It wasn't just about Mia's celebration. It was about the lies he told himself to justify excluding Lily, the way he thought he could sweep things under the rug because it was easier than facing the discomfort of including someone different. It wasn't just that he didn't want Lily there. It was that he didn't think she belonged. And that thought had settled deeply into my bones, making it impossible to go back to the way things were before. I didn't have to tell Lily what was happening. She felt it too. She wasn't asking questions anymore. She'd stopped asking me why she couldn't go, and instead, she'd started to focus on things that made her happy: her art, her books, her small world that didn't need anyone's approval. I saw the change in her, how her shoulders had relaxed, how her laughter had started to feel more genuine, how she wasn't so cautious about every word she spoke, every move she made. It was like she had finally shed the weight of trying to please people who had no intention of accepting her for who she was. The tension in our house was gone, and it was replaced with something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Real peace. Not the kind you make by pretending everything is fine. The kind that comes from standing firm in what you believe and not letting anyone tell you that your child isn't worth the effort. I had made a decision, and it wasn't one I would take back. Not for Tim. Not for anyone. Then came the phone call. Tim. His voice was tense, and I could hear his breath hitching like he didn't know how to start. I'm calling because everything's falling apart. The business is losing contracts. I'm losing clients. Everything's slipping through my fingers, Aaron. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't know how to respond. The satisfaction I had once felt when I saw things beginning to crumble had started to feel like an empty victory. I wasn't enjoying this. This wasn't some game. This was real life, and I knew Tim had crossed a line, but now the fallout was bigger than I had anticipated. I don't know what to do anymore. He continued. It feels like everything's connected. Mia's graduation, the way I handled Lily. I thought I could fix it, but I was wrong. I just wanted to make it all work. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the phone, listening to the rawness in his voice. It was a small part of me that almost felt pity for him. The person who had so casually excluded my daughter was now reaping what he had sown. But I didn't respond with pity. I spoke slowly. Tim, I'm not surprised. You thought that what mattered was the image, the perfection. You thought you could control everything, but you didn't think about the people, about the ones who really mattered. Lily has more value than you'll ever understand. I didn't say more than that. The words didn't need elaboration. He knew it now. Maybe not fully, but he understood the consequences of treating someone as expendable for the sake of appearances. It wasn't just Lily he had hurt. It was the family we had once been, and the reality of that hit harder than anything else. I don't know how to fix this, he said, sounding defeated. Maybe you can't, I answered, finally giving voice to the truth. Maybe that's the point. We didn't speak again for a long time, and when I hung up the phone, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired of the game, tired of the facade. I had already made my decision, and I had already chosen my family. Lily, Owen, us. I walked into the living room where Lily was sitting, still focused on her drawing. I took a seat beside her, watching her color with an ease that had only come from knowing she no longer had to earn her place. She didn't ask about the phone call. She didn't need to. She knew. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't have to say anything. We were finally okay. The days after that phone call felt strangely quiet, almost like the calm after a storm. Tim's apology had been the first time in years I'd heard him truly admit he was wrong, but it wasn't enough. It didn't fix anything. And I didn't expect it to. He had made a choice, and now he was living with it, just as I had been forced to do with the decision to exclude Lily. But as much as I wanted to pretend I wasn't affected by everything that had happened, I couldn't ignore the ripple effects of his actions. The first sign came when I saw Tim's social media posts. It was subtle, just an image of a fancy dinner party he'd hosted for some important clients, a picture of his perfectly arranged business meetings, the kind of stuff that used to fill his feed. But this time, something about it felt off. The smiles were too stiff. The perfectly arranged plates of food looked almost too perfect, as if it was an image carefully constructed for the eyes of others. And I knew why. It was because he was trying to fix the cracks that had shown up in his life, trying to pretend nothing had gone wrong, that everything was still smooth. But in the quiet of my house, it was different. Lily and Owen were finally getting back to their routines. They were growing into the kind of people who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Owen had stopped looking out for Lily so closely, as if he were waiting for her to break. He didn't feel like he had to protect her anymore, because she was learning how to protect herself. Lily, for the first time, had stopped trying to blend in, to fit a mold she wasn't meant to. She was starting to talk more openly about her interests, the things that excited her. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was honest. Then one evening, there was a knock at the door. The kind of knock that wasn't an emergency, but still made you pause for a moment before answering. When I opened it, there stood my parents. They were dressed as if they were about to attend a gala, polished and pristine, their smiles too bright, too rehearsed. Mom held a container in her hand, like some sort of peace offering. Dad's hands were tucked casually in his pockets, his shoulders lifted in that fake nonchalance he always had when he was trying to appear harmless. "Hi, Aaron," Mom said, her voice syrupy, like she was reading from a script. "Can we talk?" I stood there, not stepping aside. I didn't need to invite them in. I had heard the rumors, the whispers of their worry that everything was slipping away. Business deals, social connections, their carefully curated life. The small talk wasn't going to fix anything. I wasn't interested in smoothing things over. "What about?" I asked, keeping my voice calm but firm. Mom exchanged a glance with Dad before speaking again, like they were waiting for the right moment to deliver their line. "We hate how things have been," she said. "This has gotten out of hand." Dad nodded quickly, adding, "We want to make it right." We didn't realize how it sounded, the way everything went down. They were both trying too hard. They wanted me to apologize, to fix their mess, to be the one to heal the rift they had caused. I felt it, their desperate attempt to pull me back into the fold, to be the one who could patch up their mistakes. But I wasn't going to be their fixer anymore. Not for them. Not for anyone. "There's concern," Mom said carefully, lowering her voice like this was some grand secret. "About the partnership. It's not just the family drama. We're trying to fix things." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. She was talking about business deals, partnerships that had been built on false pretenses. I had no interest in being a part of that world anymore. "Let's clear the air," she continued. "We want you to come. For dinner. For everyone to see that we're still a family." I looked past them, toward Lily and Owen, who were sitting at the table in the kitchen. They didn't need to hear any of this. They didn't need to be pulled into another one of my family's little games, where appearances meant more than honesty. No. I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "We won't be coming. We're done." The words were final. I didn't need to say anything more. I didn't need to explain why I was making this choice. I had already made it, and I wasn't going back. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything my parents had said. There was no apology, no attempt to understand. They stood there, caught in the web they had created, trying to figure out how to salvage something they had already lost. "Think about it," Mom said weakly, her voice shaky. "I already have," I replied, closing the door without another word. I stood there for a moment, leaning against the door, listening to the faint sounds of Lily and Owen in the next room. The peace in our house was real now, and it wasn't something I was willing to sacrifice for anything. The fallout had come, and it was mine to own. I didn't need to fix their world anymore. I only needed to protect mine. A few weeks after the confrontation with my parents, everything started to settle into a rhythm I hadn't realized we'd been missing. The silence was different now. It wasn't oppressive. It wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. And for the first time in years, I could breathe a little easier. Lily and Owen had grown comfortable in the quiet. Lily wasn't on edge anymore, constantly second-guessing herself or worrying if she was doing something wrong. She drew. She read. She asked me questions without fear of being judged for how she saw the world. Owen, too, seemed to finally relax. I didn't hear him tiptoeing around Lily, trying to shield her from every comment or look. They both found their space, and it was theirs, one that didn't need to meet anyone else's expectations. I started to notice things I hadn't before. Small things, like how Owen's laughter now echoed freely in the house, or how Lily's eyes sparkled when she talked about a new drawing or a book she'd finished. I had spent so much time navigating my family's demands, trying to be the fixer, that I hadn't noticed how much of myself I had been giving up to them. But now, I was simply living with my children, no longer trying to earn approval from people who saw us as a problem to manage. Then, a few days after the last round of apologies from my parents, I got a message. It wasn't from them. It was from Nathan. I hadn't heard from him since the wedding debacle. He was the only one who had remained quiet, observing from the sidelines while the rest of my family fumbled to fix everything. Nathan's message was short and to the point. "I saw what you wrote. I just wanted to say I didn't know. I never would have asked that of you, and I respect your decision." I stared at the screen for a long moment, the words sinking in. Nathan wasn't the problem. It was never about him. He had been caught in the middle of a family that was more focused on appearances than on actual connection. But his response, his acknowledgement, was enough. It wasn't an apology I needed from him. It was understanding. And in that moment, I felt a shift. I wasn't alone in this. There were people who got it, who saw beyond the surface. A few hours later, Tim called again. This time, his voice was different. Not frantic, not defensive, just tired. "I've been thinking about what you said," he admitted, "and I realized you were right. It wasn't about Lily. It was about me, about how I thought everything needed to be perfect for it to count. And I've lost a lot because of it." I could hear the genuine regret in his voice, but I wasn't sure if it was enough to fix anything. The damage had been done. The truth was, I didn't need his apology to move forward. The only apology I needed was from myself, understanding that I had allowed myself to stay in a toxic space for too long, trying to hold everything together. "I can't fix what's broken," I said quietly. "I'm done trying to fix everyone. I've been fixing my own family for too long, and that's where I'm staying." There was a long pause on the other end, and I knew Tim didn't know how to respond. "I understand," he finally said, and that was it. That was the last time we spoke about it. The weeks that followed felt strangely normal. Not the chaotic normal of family dinners filled with passive-aggressive comments and hurtful remarks. Not the kind of normal that had me pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. This was real normal. The kind where I didn't have to explain myself. The kind where I didn't have to make anyone comfortable except my own kids. The holidays came, and this time, there was no ambush. No surprise dinner invites. No family events where I was expected to apologize for things I didn't do. We stayed home, just the three of us, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace, deep in my bones. I had learned the hard way that some people would never change. Some families would never evolve. But we had, and that was enough for me. 6 months had passed since that last heated conversation, and I was starting to feel like I was finally waking up from a long, painful dream. Tim's attempts to reconnect had all but stopped. He had sent a few texts here and there, messages that felt like they were more about him than us. I didn't respond to them. I didn't need to. The silence had become my space to breathe, to think, to truly be present in my own life without feeling like I was carrying everyone else's expectations on my shoulders. Lily and Owen were thriving. There was a new lightness in the way they moved through the world. Lily wasn't anxious about her interactions anymore. She no longer tiptoed around the idea of being too much for people. Owen, always so protective of his sister, had found a new role too. One where he didn't feel like the middleman, constantly mediating between Lily and the world around her. They were just siblings again, without the weight of expectations or judgment hanging over them. I found myself doing things I hadn't done in years, laughing at jokes that made no sense, dancing with Lily in the living room because she asked me to, sitting in silence with Owen while we watched a movie without needing to fill the space with words. It felt like I was reconnecting with the small joys that had been buried under a mountain of family obligations and compromises. One afternoon, as I sat in the kitchen, scrolling through an email I'd been meaning to reply to, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the kind of ring that sounded like an emergency, but it still made me pause. I looked over at Lily, who was drawing at the table, and then at Owen, who was on his phone, absorbed in something. Neither of them seemed concerned, so I walked to the door, wondering who it could be. When I opened it, I was met with a familiar face, Nathan. The last time I had seen him was at that disastrous family dinner. He was standing on the doorstep, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, looking a little unsure of himself. His presence was unexpected, but there was something different in his eyes this time. He wasn't wearing that forced smile, the one that people put on when they're trying to navigate family drama. "Hey," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "I know it's been a while, and I don't expect anything from you, but I wanted to apologize for everything, for not seeing it sooner, for being part of something that hurt you and Lily." I stood there, unsure how to respond at first. I hadn't anticipated this, but deep down, I knew it was coming. Nathan had always seemed like a decent guy, someone caught between two worlds, the family he was tied to and the one he was just beginning to understand. But this apology, it was different. It wasn't a half-hearted attempt to fix things. It wasn't a formality. It was real. I appreciate that, I said after a moment, my voice steady. But it's not just about you apologizing. It's about understanding why things went the way they did. Why Lily was treated the way she was. That's where the change needs to start. He nodded slowly, as if that was exactly what he was trying to say. I get it, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. We stood there for a few moments in silence, not uncomfortable, just two people who had been on different paths but were now, somehow, meeting in the middle. Finally, Nathan spoke again. I just wanted to say that I'm here, and if you ever need anything, anything at all, I'm happy to help. You've got a good family, Aaron. I hope you know that. I smiled, though it wasn't a huge, forced smile. It was more like the kind of smile that comes when you found a little bit of peace in a world that's been chaotic. Thank you, I said quietly. That means more than you know. He left shortly after, and as I closed the door behind me, I felt something shift. It wasn't that everything was fixed or that everything was okay, but the weight of the past 6 months, the silence, the fallout, the brokenness, felt a little lighter. I walked back into the kitchen, where Lily was still drawing, and sat down beside her. Owen looked up from his phone and asked, "Who was it?" "Just someone who needed to apologize," I said, ruffling his hair. He smiled, and in that moment, I realized how far we'd come. We weren't perfect, and we didn't have all the answers, but we had something better: understanding, space, and the freedom to be ourselves without fear of being judged or excluded. And that, I thought, was enough. A few more months passed, and life, surprisingly, felt normal. But not the kind of normal that felt stifling or contrived. This was the kind of normal where I didn't have to anticipate the next argument or the next uncomfortable family gathering. It was a normal where we didn't have to tiptoe around anyone's expectations or hide who we were. It was the kind of normal where I could look at Lily and Owen and see them as just children again, unburdened by the weight of family drama, free to be exactly who they were without pretending to be something else for the sake of appearances. We'd fallen into a peaceful rhythm. Lily had become more confident in herself, her voice steadier when she spoke, her posture more relaxed. I saw her smile more, genuinely, without the hesitation that used to linger in the back of her mind when she thought she might say the wrong thing or make someone uncomfortable. She still had her moments, of course. She was my daughter, after all, and life wasn't always easy for her. But there was something different about the way she carried herself now, something lighter. Owen was still Owen, quiet, sharp, protective in his own subtle way, but there was a new depth to his understanding of his sister. He no longer felt like he needed to constantly shield her from the world. He understood now that she didn't need to be protected. She just needed to be allowed to exist. The holiday season came again, and this time it was different. We weren't scrambling to fit into someone else's plans or trying to avoid the subtle digs from family members. We were just us. I decided to host a small dinner for just the three of us. It wasn't anything fancy, but it felt right. It was intimate. We spent the day cooking together, laughing over small mishaps in the kitchen, and trying new recipes. Owen made a mess with the mashed potatoes, and Lily nearly burnt the cookies, but none of it felt like a problem. It felt like a family, like we were finally able to create our own traditions, our own memories, without interference. The phone buzzed a few times that day, but I ignored it. It was mostly my parents and Tim reaching out with their typical holiday cheer, wrapped in guilt. I had read the messages before. Their pleas for us to come over to patch things up and make it right. They were still trying to put the pieces of their lives back together, as if nothing had really changed. But I didn't feel the need to respond. Not this time. Not anymore. Later, after dinner, as we sat on the couch, I realized how much I had been holding my breath for so long, waiting for something to fall apart. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. But it never did. There were no more forced apologies, no more trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for us. Just the three of us, comfortable in our quiet little world, free to simply be. Lily leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder, and Owen sat across from us, scrolling through his phone. The quiet felt like a gift, a peace I hadn't known I could find. And in that moment, I realized that I had everything I needed right here. My family, my real family, the one that mattered, was finally whole again. It wasn't about fixing things or pleasing anyone. It was about being true to ourselves, about teaching Lily and Owen that they didn't have to change for anyone. And that, for once, was enough. I glanced at them both, my heart swelling with a quiet pride I hadn't felt in years. We had made it. We had found our way back to each other, and nothing, not even the past, could take that away from us now. Life is messy, and sometimes the people closest to us can be the ones who throw the biggest curveballs. But the key is this: don't lose yourself trying to meet everyone else's expectations. Family, friends, even colleagues, they're all part of your story, but they don't define it. Stay true to who you are, protect your peace, and remember that sometimes letting go is the best thing you can do. And hey, if you've learned something from this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, so you can keep up with more life lessons and, of course, my brilliance.